The 4-0 thumping of Italy in the finals of the 2012 European Championship wasn't just a remarkable end to a Premier competition, it was history. Spain had etched its name in the sands of time, creating a moment that surprised both pundits and fans. You needn't be a genius to put it together. After winning both domestic and international competitions, clubs won trebles and quadruples in a season. Countries don't get talked about in that regard because such a feat is years in the making and cannot be achieved in a single season. But between 2008 and 2012, Spain had pulled off a rare snatch and grab, picking up every major trophy to secure a treble, the first of its kind, and the first to win consecutive silverware on foreign soil in over 50 years of football. Over a decade down the line, no country's come close to equaling or breaking that record again. For perspective, Spain were hardly the only dominant side in the world at the time. In Europe alone, La Roja had to compete with the brilliance of France with its star-studded cast of Thierry Henry and Zinedine Zidane, to name a few. Not to mention that Les Bleus had had a magnificent run leading up to the millennium. Between 1996 and 2001, France appeared in the 1996 Euro semi-finals, won the 1998 World Cup, bagged the 2000 Euros, and then took home the Confederations Cup in 2001. That's two major silverwares in the same span as Spain's treble. If you think that was magnificent, wait until you find out that West Germany had a similar run of dominance. Between 1972 and 1974, their trophy room was home to both the Euros and World Cup trophies. These records prove not only that Spain's treble was mind-blowingly spellbinding, but also that they weren't up against plumbers from Plymouth when they went on this victory streak. But just how did La Roja pull it off? There was more than a single factor involved in Spain's era of dominance, but let's start with the facts of what transpired between those years of absolute brilliance. It's debatable which competition is more difficult to conquer, but many lead towards the Euros more than the World Cup. The reasoning isn't far-fetched. World Cup group stages are way easier than those of the Euros. Additionally, while there's a lot of history to support the fact that there were other teams greater than the Spanish team from 2008 to 2012 with an even richer history and more silverware, the focus here is on dominance, and what that team pulled off remains unmatched. What makes this period even more noteworthy is that Spain were a crass underachiever before this run of form, and had since slipped back into mediocrity ever since. But this is not the video to tear La Roja's current run of form to shreds, it's about the one time they got things right. Before the first domino fell in 2008 to start this title-winning streak, Spain last won the Euros in 1964. That's right, the country wasn't even democratic then, and the dictator at the reins, General Francisco Franco, had already pulled the team from the 1960 edition of the competition. It was largely a ploy to keep La Roja from playing against the Soviet Union for political reasons. Put simply, it was a good old-fashioned right-wing dictatorship versus the vibrant red of communism. Politics won that year, since the USSR would go on to win the competition. 4 years later, Franco was kind enough to let his country go all the way. However, the result was a rehashing of what happened 4 years earlier. Spain beat Hungary 2-1, the USSR spanked Denmark 3-0, and all over again, it was Spain versus the USSR in the final. After a nervy match that looked destined for extra time, Spain's Pareda whipped in a cross that Marcelino headed home to break the deadlock and throw the Santiago Bernabeu into an uproar. La Roja were champions! But the victory was a one-off because the country was still struggling to find its football identity. It failed to defend its title at the next Euros, and it took another 20 years until 1984 before Spain came close to challenging for the trophy again. Although Vicente del Bosque's name is mostly associated with this period of Spanish dominance, he didn't lead La Roja to its first 3 trophies in 2008. He was, in fact, appointed after the tournament to replace Luis Aragonés. Aragonés' name seems to have blurred from this part of Spanish history because he wasn't long off retirement after winning the 2008 Euros. The man had spent his managerial career at Atletico Madrid, the club he played for during his playing career. There's also the small matter that despite being one of the early adopters of passing football, He was considered a dinosaur manager with Route 1 back-to-basic tactics. Put simply, the Spanish version of Sam Allardyce or Diego Simeone version 1.0. For all his criticisms, Aragonés was a practical coach, and it was his willingness to adapt and change that helped Spain clinch the 2008 Euros. Because, let's face it, his squad was nothing spectacular, at least compared to the golden generation that Vicente del Bosque got to work with. For perspective, Vicente del Bosque was so spoiled for choice that he got rid of strikers from his squad altogether and still won the Euros. Meanwhile, Aragonés was getting flack for not inviting Raúl, who he thought to be less of a team player because of his massive ego and club status at Real Madrid. Instead, Aragonés relied on the likes of Rubén de la Red, Juanito, Fernando Navarro and Dani Guiza. Hardly faces you picture when thinking of Spain's golden generation. However, one could make a solid argument that this team played even more exciting football under Aragonés than the La Roja side that won the 2010 World Cup and 2012 Euros. Vicente del Bosque also has his predecessor to thank for his reliance on midfield ingenuity. Aragonés realized that playing exciting, adventurous football on the front foot while cycling possession was better than simply holding onto the ball and trying to break down the opposition with 3 players, as Del Bosque often did. For this kind of football, Aragonés favored midfield maestros like Xavi, Andre Iniesta and David Silva, who played behind lethal forwards like David Villa and Fernando Torres. This created a fluidity in the team that made them difficult to predict, as they were always swapping positions and playing away from their favored areas of the pitch, a far cry from the structured possession football of the Del Bosque era that fans decried as boring passing football at some point. Fast forward to July of 2008, and Vicente del Bosque was appointed to keep the ball rolling. You'd think La Roja's latest victory would keep Del Bosque from making radical changes, but it didn't. Instead, he introduced fans to yet more tiki-taka football by scrapping traditional forwards for a more strikerless team, instead of loading up the team with midfielders. For example, Cesc Fabregas, who many might recall as more of a defensive midfielder in his final years, played as a false 9. You'd think that was a recipe for disaster, until you find just how crucial he was at helping Spain lift those trophies. The reinvention of La Roja was long overdue, and fans were there for it. For decades, the team was all talk and no substance, like Lionel Messi promising to return the Champions League to Camp Nou in 2018. But Del Bosque had an ace up his sleeve between 2008 and 2012, and that was to rethink how his team played completely. La Roja was known for tiki-taka football, but they couldn't just rely on that against every opposition. So, they had to take the game to the opponent in unique ways, and a strikerless formation composed of the best midfield playmakers in the world was one such way to follow. Also, looking at the formation of the lineup, Del Bosque didn't exactly adhere to any traditional style, with the team looking more like something out of a mad tactician's football manager profile. But the only reason this succeeded in the first place was the players. The players Del Bosque picked to execute his mind-bending tactics were mostly from Barcelona and Real Madrid, but the midfielders primarily played for the Catalan Giants. So, they were players who played tiki-taka football every week of their lives and were comfortable holding and recycling possession in short, fast passes. So, in the 2008 Euros, we saw a Spanish team that went all out on the offensive, rehashing the 1960s by playing and beating Russia in the semis before securing a narrow 1-0 win in the final against Germany. 2 years later, at the 2010 World Cup in South Africa, Spain were on a hot 35-game unbeaten run. But the competition didn't come easy. Other teams had caught up with their style of play. It was Switzerland that let the Spaniards know they were now familiar with La Roja's game. The Swiss implemented a low defensive block and struck in the counter, seizing the one opportunity to score a goal and shut out Spain for a 1-0 lead. The unbeaten streak had come to an end, and anyone who cared to watch had just seen the mighty Spain reduced to a clumsy mess. There just needed to be another brave team like Switzerland that was willing to roll with the punches and seize the opportunity for a knockout. If that happened again, Spain were as good as gone. As you'd expect, every opponent tried to pull a Switzerland, sitting deep and waiting to strike on the counter. You'd think Del Bosque would change his tactics, but he didn't. Instead, he stuck to tiki-taka football and urged his players to retain possession even more. You can't strike on the counter if you never had the ball in the first place. And that's just what happened. La Roja wore down every opponent, playing patiently and finding the right moment to strike like a stalking predator. They dispatched Portugal, Paraguay, and Germany with no more than a goal, but that was good enough. The final saw much of the same from the Netherlands, a low block and a counter-attack strategy. So, Spain held on to the ball and kept knocking on goal, and the Dutch kept their doors shut. The match seemed destined for extra time, until Andre Iniesta latched onto a stray ball in the final 5 minutes and drilled home a dramatic winner to earn La Roja the double. By 2012, Del Bosque rolled out his now famous strikerless formation with Cesc Fabregas leading the line. It was strange and seemed destined for failure, but Del Bosque was seeing the bigger picture. His side now had more midfielders who created chances for fun. These players also knew their way around the final third and could tuck in great goals when they did. That was good enough for him. In the final, La Roja didn't win by 1 goal as they did in the previous 2 finals. No, they slapped Italy about like a rag doll, winning 4-0 to prove that Del Bosque might have just found an even better winning strategy. That was Spain's 10th consecutive match they'd won by knockout and without conceding a goal. La Roja were no longer a boring side dependent on tiki-taka football. They were an exciting side opponents could never get the ball from. Now that we know who made those successes possible, let's talk about how they managed that level of brilliance in the first place. When Iniesta rounded a densely packed Dutch defense to slot home the winner at the Soccer City Stadium in the 2010 World Cup, he did so as the product of one of the most intensive footballing institutions in the world. Iniesta came up through the youth setup designed at his boyhood club Albacete by then manager Ginés Melende, before joining the famed La Masia Academy at FC Barcelona. By the time he scored the winner in South Africa, Melende had taken his youth development program, or categorías inferiores, to the national scale and had been overseeing it at the Spanish Football Federation for a decade at the time. While La Roja's triumph at the World Cup brought joy to many, it also raised concerns for some, who wondered if the team could keep up with its new standards. For that, Melendez's reply was, "Don't worry, we have all the reinforcements ready and waiting in the wings." But just what did he mean? In July 2010, the Spanish under-17 team finished as runners-up to England at the UEFA Under-17 European Championships. 3 years later, Spain had 2 UEFA Under-19 European Championships and 2 UEFA Under-21 European Championships under its belt. But that's just at the youth level. The Team La Roja faced Italy in the final game of the treble, featured world-renowned stars such as Casillas, Arbeloa, Piqué, Ramos, Alba, Xavi, Busquets, Alonso, Silva, Fabregas, and Iniesta. All these players played over 300 times at the youth level for the country and were regulars in the senior squad. While most countries treat talent acquisition for the national team as something to do in the lead-up to a tournament, for Spain, it's no different from running a club. So, the youth tournament is a chance to bleed youngsters and prepare them for a place in the senior squad. Since 2001, Spain's won the Under-17 Championship 3 times, the Under-19 trophy 6 times, and the Under-21 European Championships twice. La Roja wasn't just dominant on the grand stage. It was just as dominant on the smaller stages, and it was creating the next generation of indomitable players to succeed in the team that achieved the treble glory. In Spain, football development begins with recruiting 55 youngsters in every age category: under 15, under 19, and under 21. That's 5 players per position. Every summer, Melende and his scouts work on getting the best players for his 55-man list. Xavi was another product of this system, having been found by Teodoro Nieto and drafted into the top 55 youngsters during a regional competition playing for Catalonia in Tenerife. Melende explained just how the system works. In Spain, we're almost further ahead than the clubs when it comes to spotting the cream of youth talent. There are tournaments where the best teams in the 19 regions competed under 12, under 16, under 18 and so on. The 2013 Under-12 national tournament took place a couple of weeks ago in Logroño, and we've already selected 24 youngsters from that. Those same boys will be in the Spain Under-15 side in 3 years. The key research work is done by 57 scouts nationwide who work for us voluntarily. They're elected by their regional federations, Andalusia, Catalonia, Asturias, Basque Country, and so on. We all meet up once a year in December, and I explain to them precisely what I'm looking for. Then they call me weekly with information, which is input to a database which I set up when I arrived in 2001. Another figure who'd helped create La Roja's golden generation shared similar sentiments, saying, all the players at the World Cup had come through the same system, and almost every single one of them had won trophies with Spain at youth level. So, from the time the youngsters are drafted at age 15 until they turn 21, they're trained in the same styles as their predecessors, such that when they're ready for the senior squad, they know the Spanish game like the back of their palms. Even better, this system creates a tight-knit bond between these players, creating relationships that neither club nor geography can disrupt, equipping them with ideals that no one is above the team. Perhaps this mentality and system in general made Spain's golden generation more successful than England's, whose squad was largely underwhelming due to big egos, club rivalries and an unforgiving media. That said, a good system isn't enough to create world beaters. So, what did the trick for Spain? You've heard of the Spanish Revolution, but what about La Innovación? See, Vicente del Bosque's trophy-laden run was not a coincidence. It put Spain in the debate for the greatest national team in history, up there with Brazil's squad of the 70s, France's current and previous squads, and the Dutch team of the 70s. But how did they do it? While Ginés Melende was steadily cultivating new crops of talent for the Spanish senior squad, the appointment of Vicente del Bosque also coincided with the appointment of another serial winner at the club level. Of course, we mean the invincible Pep Guardiola. Before dominating the Premier League, he managed Barcelona, playing a similar playing style to what Del Bosque enacted at the national team. The only difference was that one of them had a tiny Argentine wizard on their books and the other didn't. But Del Bosque made up for this with the versatility of the players at his disposal. For instance, he pushed Iniesta out wide from his attacking CM position under Pep, instead opting for Xavi, Alonso and Busquets in midfield. That meant that there were 4 midfield maestros present in Del Bosque's tactics at any one time, all of whom could pass, hold possession and create chances like it was nobody's business. This approach helped them defeat teams at the 2010 World Cup when their all-out attack strategy proved incapable of overcoming low defensive blocks. In 2010, Del Bosque still believed in forwards and used strikers, usually David Villa and Fernando Torres. He also deployed wingers like Jesus Navas or Pedro to hold the other wide area. However, after the World Cup, Del Bosque knew better than to continue with this strategy, so he opted for something even more bonkers. What's better than 4 midfield kings? 6. For the 2012 Euros, he ditched forwards entirely, swapping his winger and striker out for Cesc Fabregas and the attacking mind of David Silva on the wing opposite Iniesta. Del Bosque had casually set up 6 of the most gifted playmakers in world football on top of one of the most defensively astute back fours. The result was over 510 passes, 10 games without losing or conceding a goal, 11 passes per minute, a pass every second, and a final that felt more like a friendly. Italy didn't even get the chance to mount a solid defense. Despite having a star-studded diamond midfield, they were always on the back foot. Gli Azzurri simply couldn't handle the constant, fast-paced movement of the ball. If that wasn't bad enough, Del Bosque had a young Jordi Alba terrorizing Italy down the left flank like prime Roberto Carlos. Both sides featured 11 players each, but at every turn it felt like Spain had twice the players on their side. It was a demolition of beautiful proportions. What Spain managed to achieve in those years remains unrivaled. But even better is how they achieved those victories. The team didn't simply rest on its past successes, but kept adapting to remain unpredictable and keep up with the opposition that got the better of them. Is it any wonder then that experts argue that that team was the best international side in football history? No. And until such a time as that record is rivaled, they remain the best to do it. Viva España! Vamos! What are your thoughts on this Spain side of 2011 to 2012? Are they the best national side ever? Let us know below, and if you enjoyed this video, please give it a like.